Hello and welcome to CX Today. My name is Charlie, and today I'm delighted to be joined by three excellent customer experience analysts to discuss some of the latest news from across the space. Yesterday, I'm delighted to be joined by Liz Miller, VP and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research, Rebecca Wettemann, Principal at Valoir, and Michael Fauscette, Founder, CEO, and Chief Analyst at Arion Research. Thank you all very much for joining me, and let's get right into the news, I guess. And probably the biggest news story from across the past month has been from in the CX space. Has been Verint launching its Open CCaaS platform. Of course, this is quite an interesting move as it works hand in hand with a lot of CCaaS vendors in areas like workforce optimization. But I don't know if anybody had any wants to share their initial thoughts to hearing that news.
My statement about it is that integration's hard, and anything that makes it easier should make it easier. I don't know. It's an interesting idea anyway, I think, and certainly it's something that it's needed in the space, because integration and telephony have never particularly been friends, I guess we should say. So, I mean, I thought it was an interesting idea, and I haven't, it'll be interesting to see what feedback and what customers say about it, because I haven't, obviously too new to have that, but it definitely is a strong move, I think.
Telephony has traditionally been one of the most closed spaces, right? The contact center has been one of those places that's been the hardest to integrate. It's nice to see that we're seeing that swing now, where everybody's saying we need to be more open. We need to enable people to integrate. We need to be able to leverage ecosystem partners in a way that's less disruptive and creates less friction for the business.
Yep. And I find it really interesting if you look at this outside of, wow, Verint partners with a whole lot of people, or, wow, there's already a lot of players in the space. And I think the integration, I mean, everything that Michael and Rebecca said, I couldn't agree with more violently. I think if I look at this offering just in a bubble and just in isolation, what I find really interesting is that this is their solution is one that really starts at work and then moves into all of the operational systems. Mm. Whereas if you look at all of the other providers, they've really started at system and kind of moved out to try to accommodate work. And yeah. I think that we've all seen, while that is a really noble pursuit and one that absolutely has to happen, that in and of itself can be really hard, right? Being able to take your telephony system and that contact center, that backbone, and then make it fit and make it work for your agents, for your supervisors, for your leaders. We've seen it can be a really awkward expansion and a really awkward transition. And so I'm going to be really interested to see how this rolls out and how everyone gets to play with it and what people start to say, because people who look to Verint as really being that expert in how work in the contact center happens, like literally how work happens, it's going to be very interesting to see if that kind of people-centric core stays, or do they shift to how everyone else built their tools, where it's like, okay, it's telephony first as opposed to workforce first. So it's going to be interesting to see how this rolls out. I think that the fact that it's, they're like, it's an open CCaaS. I'm like, okay, but yeah, it was one of those moments. That's great, because from an IT perspective, you want that. You want a platform that does integrate. You want something that you're not fighting to shove into the rest of your stack. But I mean, I think the kids over at AWS are probably like, but I do think it's a really, really interesting move. I also think that it's a move that if you're a UCaaS solution, right? If you're if you're one of those kids that are like, wait a minute, but we want to be a CCaaS too. Like, I think it upends the alphabet soup CAS party a little bit, which I kind of like. I kind of like that it's a little disruptive.
I think there's two things in here too that are kind of underneath it that are important. One is how communication has shifted. And I was just doing some work for one of my clients on consumer communications. And one of the biggest things that came through is if you offer the channel that the customer prefers, they're like 82% more likely to stay a customer, which is pretty incredible, right? And unfortunately, though, you can't, it's not a predictable answer because customers prefer that they prefer at the time based on risk profile and activity and blah, all the other things. So you have to be open across all of these channels, or you're not going to meet that customer where they want to meet you when they wake up today and want to meet you somewhere else, right? And then the other one I think is the open AI / opening yourself up to multiple large language model generative AI tools, because you're gonna see them all over the place, and certainly from a bot perspective, we know that's a big push, but there are a lot of solutions out there, and just like Salesforce, I think being open to all those different engines is a really important thing.
I think we're going to see a competition of who can be more open.
Yeah,
it's me. Yeah. But ironically, open to large language models, open to large model AI formats that a lot of organizations, if we could just take a moment and just be super honest about what's happening right now, everyone who has built the model, built the connection to the model, like the people within the vendors are like, we've got this. We totally understand how, and we can switch it. And then we'll have another model that'll send you to the right model. And it's like, meanwhile, customers are like,
what?
Like, what do I like? I'm sorry. Like, and they're still trying to figure out how they get started. And so it's great that everyone has this kind of concept of it's going to be open. You could put any AI that you want. You can bring your own model. And they're like, what's a model? Like, so there's a bit of a gap, that we have to fix.
Yeah. And Liz brings up a really, really important point, right? It's a really good point, Liz, is that for the folks who were traditionally, had contact center on their business card, right? Like thinking about the different channels that they may not even own, let alone the different models that are kind of outside of their comfort zone, is going to be really hard, right? There's a lot of change that has to happen in that mindset as they think about, how do I evaluate systems? How do I deploy? How do I train people? How do I kind of keep this running on an ongoing basis without exposing myself to risk? There's a really steep learning curve there still.
And how do I make sure that I am partnered outside of my little fiefdom of contact center? Because as Rebecca has said, it has been this very strange thing has happened over the last, let's say, 5 years, where it's been like, no, I own CX. I alone am the entirety of CX. And like the walls have gotten bigger and they've gotten thicker. And that's really bad. And that's a really bad place to be, especially when you're talking about managing where the customer's channel wants to be. Because the customer doesn't want to be like, oh, so now you're going to do the same thing to me that you used to do on the phone and switch me to a lot of different departments. Now you're going to do that in email. Sweet. Like, said no customer ever on the face of the planet. They just want it handled. And so if marketing initiated something first, sales initiated something first, do you think anyone in this planet wants to read the line, oh, I'm sorry, I can't help you in the contact center because you first spoke to marketing in email?
Not happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
so
and
I
even
think
the
there's a lot of that.
Too, right? Yeah. Just having the context follow the conversation is extremely important.
Yeah.
And if you're not open, it's going to just silo like always. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are lots of really great points there, and I think it's particularly fascinating, as kind of all of you touched upon, how just the swelling of these CX vendors into different spaces does impact the end customer, I guess, because that is what matters at the end of the day. So it's lots of food for thought in there. I kind of want to switch lanes now, because I think we've covered that very thoroughly, and just talk a little bit about one of Genesys's latest innovations. I always struggle with that plural, and that is the customer experience index. This is kind of Genesys' challenge on traditional customer experience measurement. We all know the kind of problems companies face with NPS and benchmarking now, particularly. I think, Rebecca, I know you've covered this a fair bit. Do you maybe want to kind of set the scene a little bit for us?
Sure. So I think it's important to distinguish between what Genesys recently announced from its broader kind of experience index, which is still a work in progress, right? The idea that I'm going to be able to measure things in an important way beyond sort of the traditional limited measure of NPS. experience index piece that we saw them launch is one piece of that. And it's really interesting because it's really about getting the agent experience right? So based on a deep understanding of what agents evaluate when they look at their overall experience in the contact center and a bunch of benchmarking research, now I can say, what are the things that I can change about my agent experience to ultimately create a better customer experience, better agent engagement, and better customer engagement? So I think it's important to point out that what they have as an offering today is the agent piece, not the broader kind of measurement, but it's a hint at what they're heading toward, which is everybody knows that NPS doesn't work very well. And everybody knows that surveys stink, right? When we're talking about customer experience.
Yep.
So how do I bring the technology, bring the ability to measure and understanding when I can figure out tone, when I can understand sentiment, when I can bring all those things into the model to have a fuller real-time picture of the actual customer experience, not what somebody who decided to tell me about it told me.
In that report that they produced a month after the interaction, though, now I don't actually remember. Yeah, I love the individualized piece of it. I think that's really important from an agent perspective, just being able to understand what you do impacts directly, and here's how, and see that. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. And time real-time data to it too. So
Yeah.
it's not again, what it tells me, but what I'm actually seeing happen in the systems.
Yeah. And I think that from the reality here is that I think we've all seen multiple studies and multiple points of research on the consumer side of the research angle of saying, okay, what do you hate about experience and rude agent? Getting not the agent not having all the information. It tends to really focus. That feedback tends to really focus on what turns out is employee experience, right? It's not the agent's fault if the agent doesn't have all of that information about the customer in front of them. Yeah. It's the system's fault, right? It's the process fault. It's the workflow's fault. And so I think that a lot of the things that they're looking to measure and have those concrete metrics about are really going to help inform also, I think, the strategy of how we roll out these systems and how a Genesys customer is going to look at, okay, what are some of those processes that maybe we haven't rolled out correctly? Yeah. I think there's a big gap in today's market between how we roll out old process onto new technology and this kind of picture of nirvana that all of the vendors really love to show us, which we know to be true. And I think the three of us all know, we all look at these new rollouts and the new platform rollouts or even new analytics rollouts, and we're like, yeah, that is how you should be doing it. And then you look at the company and you're like, oh, so you just took all the old things that you used to do badly and you shoved it into an automated workflow. So it's bad faster. Awesome. So I think that a lot of these types of measures, and I think a lot of these indexes, and I think Genesys is really moving in a smart direction here, right? Because it's about measuring and pinpointing and identifying the things that are most important to both the customer and to the employee, and almost giving that alert, it's that wake-up call to the organization to say, hey, the strategy might be wrong here. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, because if we're also honest, that's also the biggest challenge with NPS, right? If we really want to break down what the problem with NPS is, the problem isn't asking someone, would you recommend this? It's actually putting the systems and the processes and the programs in place that take your existing score and intentionally do things to move it, right? So if we just have an index, great, we've identified these problems. But I think that both Genesys and customers are going to have to find those best practices so that they put intentional steps in place to make sure that index score over time continues to improve, even with all the churn that's going to happen behind it, right? So I think that becomes my hope, is that they also, kind of take a little page from folks like, a Salesforce, where community becomes really important. Let's pull those best practices in and let's give that to our people so that the CX index continues to not just be a benchmark, but also becomes a roadmap to how do other people improve it.
Yeah. I mean, I love the idea, and I talked about this a bit in just predictions for this year and going forward, that we're going to see real-time data all over the place now. And that's a huge advantage when you're talking about customer behavior. The more I can understand in the moment, the more I can tailor the experience so that I do actually, respond to the, not just what's said, but the behavior around it. I think that's really, really powerful in this. And that's definitely one of the things that I think you'll see across a lot of different CRM and CX solutions this year.
Yeah. Again, lots of really good stuff there. And I really love, what I really love about this too is the fact that it's pinpointing the outcomes for the customer, agent, and the business, not kind of prioritizing one or any. So a business can always see how its actions affect one of those three critical stakeholders. And then, of course, as well as to the point that you've all mentioned, really, the fact that NPS, how you see people manipulate that, and how you can instead have a set in stone. Well, it's not going to be as close as you can get to that. I think is particularly positive. Will it ever be able to challenge something like the NPS and CSAT? I'm not sure, but I think it's a movement step in the right direction, perhaps. But I think that's great. I think those are the two biggest pieces of news, and lots of really great insights there. So I'd like to thank all three of our excellent analysts for joining me today, and thank everybody for watching as well. Bye for now.
Thanks, John.